Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw, and I'm here in Malta still, and I'm here with Liam Gauci, who is the director of a new museum upcoming called the Malta Maritime Museum. And if you know Malta, Malta is surrounded by water, so obviously there's a lot of history to come. We're going to talk to Liam about this museum and also a little bit about Maltese history, because he knows a lot. He's a historian, and we're going to find out about all that and more on Insider Travel Report. Now, Liam, first of all, great to meet you. We have a new shared love of football. I think we could talk about football for hours, but we're not here to talk about football. We could talk about football if we want, but we want to talk today about history and about this particular museum. Now, this museum right now, honestly, is not open yet. When is it supposed to open?
So, by the end of 2023, we will be open. As a museum, we've been closed for 3 years since COVID. And we decided to re-inject new life into our story. And so we are slowly but surely going to not retell the story, but tell our old story in a new way. And that new way is the story of the Maltese people living.
So it is the history of Maltese people, which is really intricately entwined with the sea, right?
The sea. Indeed, even the building itself. So
what is this building?
The building itself, well, we are on the site of the Arsenal of the Order of St. John. I dragged
the Knights of St. John?
I sneaked in a bit of football banter there. However, the Knights of St. John were building ships on this site then, and it was called the Arsenal, where the galleys, around 150-foot boat, not the metric system. It was these warships were being built on site to sail out of Malta to capture everything and anything that belonged to the Ottoman Empire, drag it back to Malta, and sell it off to Europe. Then, when the British Navy was invited over to Malta,
this was after Napoleon, right?
Yes, after Napoleon, and we'll get to him very very soon. That Corsican upstart. The British Navy decided that they should topple down the arsenal and build a bakery to bake around 6,000 loaves of bread a day.
Wow! So this was we're baking bread here, right?
Yes, we're baking bread, and the museum is the former Royal Naval Bakery, which was in operation until 1979.
So then this was all through the war. Was it hurt by the war?
Yes, we had a lot of direct hits. In fact, we are still restoring them. This was the most bombed place on earth during the Second World War. More bombs fell on Malta than they fell on London. Why? Because we are strategically placed in the Mediterranean, and we were a bit of a, let's say, a dagger in the back of Rommel and his Afrika Korps, because no fuel, no supplies were going to North Africa, because in Malta there was a small band of submariners sailing out beneath the waves to sink all the convoys being directed to Rommel in North Africa.
And in fact, Malta never fell to the Germans. It was always a British colony here, right?
Yes. In fact, we are we proudly have that symbol on our flag. We've got the George Cross, which was presented to the island as a nation for bravery during the Second World War. It was a dark time, but I think we are very proud of what happened during the Second World War.
Now let's talk a little bit about, and then it was a bakery, and then it fell into the British left, yes, eventually, and then Malta was independent. So what has it been since then? When did it become a museum?
In 1992, the museum was opened. And we started slowly but surely creating a collection, because our collection, as a national collection, we have had a museum on the island since the 17th century. But obviously back then it was creating a cabinet of curiosities. And then slowly but surely, in the very late 19th century, the government of Malta, in conjunction with the British, created the museums department. Okay. So a ministry dedicated to museums. Mm-hmm. And this ministry started to create the Fine Arts Museum, the Museum of Archaeology, the Palace of the Inquisitor. We had our temples both in Malta and in Gozo, the Citadel. So all these museums were starting to open. And there was no maritime museum until the 90s. And it was quite ironic. We're an island. We should have a maritime museum.
You had a history with the British Navy, with navies before that, all kinds of things going on. So now, what did the museum have at that time that you're changing in the way you're presenting it?
So it is, first of all, we have realized that we need to tell a story of a people in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's not the story of when the Knights were here. It's not the story when the French were here. It's a story of what the interaction was on the island. And just to give you a little example, for example, we'll give you an example of the very early 19th century. I'm sure you've heard the U.S. Marines anthem, From the Thrones of Montezuma
to the halls of Tripoli. Yeah.
Yes, and the shores of Tripoli refer to a little moment when the U.S. Navy was operating from Malta with Maltese sailors and American sailors under the command of Decatur to attack Tripoli, where the Barbary Corsairs were based.
Right.
And the USS Philadelphia, that lovely story of when it was captured and then retaken and burnt in the harbor of Tripoli, that was actually done by American sailors operating from Malta.
From Malta. I knew where they were operating. I didn't know they were operating from Malta, though.
Yes. And, a little fun fact, we actually, for example, in our museum, we're going to be talking about this episode. We're going to be talking about what uniforms these sailors were having. And we actually have the letters of the American consul in Malta writing back to obviously to the US government back then. And we actually know what was being served to Decatur when he was on shore. And we can tell you, for example, that he was eating stuffed Maltese rabbit with...
As one does.
Yes, because there's not a lot of game on the island, but rabbit is I would call it our national dish. We love our rabbit. It was stuffed with chestnuts and cranberries, which are surely not found in Malta, but being imported.
And no wonder he won then.
Yes, no wonder. He had a good full belly full of stuffed rabbit and Madeira wine. So that's
well, that's amazing. That kind of story is really, certainly it connects with Americans because of that. It's a period of our history that a lot of Americans don't remember well, but now it'll be here in this museum. So that's your idea, is to really bring the history of not just any of the people that had to do with Malta. Obviously, the British were here. We talked briefly. Napoleon was here for a couple of years.
Napoleon was here. So Napoleon came over to Malta for a weekend break on his way to Egypt. Right. So the whole idea was, listen, Napoleon, first of all, had a system of creating an army and supplying his army with money and food from plunder. That's all. That's what he did in Italy. He did it brilliantly. And that's what he did on his way to Egypt. He captured Malta because 3/4 of the knights were French. Just to give you an idea, there wasn't a lot of bloodshed when Napoleon captured the island, because the secretary to the Grand Master, the Prince of Malta, was actually a spy for Napoleon. And when Napoleon left, he turned him into the first Maltese president, because the French gave the island a constitution. Not a very good one at that, but they gave a constitution to the island. Napoleon was here, left all the way to Egypt, where he went trying to mimic what Alexander the Great was doing. Right. He failed. And for 2 years, the French were in Malta. But after 3 months, there was a civil war on the island. And 20,000 people died fighting against the French. And it was at this point where the Maltese actually wrote a constitution on the lines of the American Constitution. Why? Because there were Maltese living in America at the time. Just to give you a couple of corsairs who were working with George Washington during the 7 Years' War. He was still pro-British back then. But
early on, yeah, right.
Very, very early on. However, just to give you an idea, you've all heard of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, cast by Pass and Stowe. Pass is actually John Patch from Malta.
Really? I didn't know.
He was a Maltese migrant in America.
This is part of the story you'll tell in this museum, as well as there's so much more. We're talking about Napoleon. There's the long history of the Knights of St. John, or we call them the Knights of Malta. Exactly. And then we had the British who were here for ever since, because then the British were invited after Napoleon, right, to come in. And they're more than happy to do so.
Very happy to do so, because listen, the Maltese are a nation of shopkeepers. Now, when the French were here, and we were trying to sell our produce or things that our ill-gotten gains from corsairing, like coffee, cinnamon, nutmeg, which we captured from the Ottomans, brought here and then sell off to Europe. If we went out with our merchant ships with the tricolor, Nelson was going to capture the whole thing. But if you get the British, the whole French fleet was at the bottom of Abu Qir Bay in Egypt. And so, well, I think the British were a better solution for the Maltese merchants, and they begged Nelson and the band of brothers to come here and to take over Malta. In fact, the first democratically elected Maltese president was a Royal Navy captain called Alexander Ball. We're a very peculiar bunch.
that is it's amazing history, and you get that all here. Now, tell us, situate where we are, where this museum is, because that's also interesting, because we're in the original part of this area. I mean, we keep talking about Valletta, which is actually across the bay, and this place is called what?
Birgu. So Valletta is the new capital city, built in around 1566. Right. We are in Birgu, which dates probably back to Phoenician times. We are talking about close to 600 to 800.
They were pretty good sailors too.
Very good sailors, but around 600 to 800 BC. Right. So this is how old this area is, and anywhere you look, you're going to see history. We're talking about underwater. We're talking about, so just to give you an idea, we are at a quayside where we have evidence that Roman ships were here, Phoenicians, as I said, then in medieval times, Spanish ships, Aragonese, Catalan ships were here, Angevins. This is the place. And
now we just have super yachts out there.
Yes, just below the super yachts, we were allowed to excavate underwater in only 5 cubic meters, and we found 1,000 objects. Wow. 5 cubic meters. So let alone what one would find if we were able to excavate. But this is one of the most active harbors in the Mediterranean. There's no way where they're going to close the harbor for me to excavate.
And then also, those of you who will eventually send your clients over here on cruise ships, it is a huge cruise port too. In fact, one of the biggest ships in the world is just a few meters away, one of the MSC ships. Yeah. And you'll get a lot of other vessels coming in here. In fact, there are at least 2 others in here. And so you're going to find Malta as being a cruise port, and then when you come here, you're going to find out all this history you have to come back and learn even more about. And that's a time when, well, hopefully if you come here, send your clients here for the cruise, you'll come to Liam's museum when it's open, and hear more about it and hear all about this. And actually, I came here by boat myself. They don't have gondolas here, but they have another kind of craft, right?
Yeah, we call it the Daisa, the Maltese Daisa. Again, we have a Semitic language. And even the irony of having wooden boats in Malta is there are no trees in Malta. So even if when you were on the gondola, we still call it gondola, on the Daisa, you can see that it's thin wood. Right. It's very thin wood because you need to be very economical in your wood. But
as you said, there are no trees. It's amazing. I was all across the island. I didn't see any very few trees at all.
No, there are no trees because this is the Mediterranean. It's Garrigue and all that. But through that, with these limitations, we created this little nation state in the middle of the Mediterranean,
which has now is independent. It's a member with the EU. Yes. They use the euro, but it is, as you said, it's a Semitic language, but it is the Roman alphabet, sort of. Yes, the Latin alphabet. And interesting, in fact, you told me the other day that you're all Catholic here, but you refer to God as Allah.
Yes, because. And that is the beauty of being on the frontier of Europe. We are on the edge of Europe. So we were, let's say, we lending our culture, our nation was getting a little bit from here, a little bit from there. You know, we just to give you an idea and to show you how complex we are. When the Knights of St. John arrived here in 1530, that's around 500 years ago, the Grand Master, or the Prince of the Order of St. John, was invited by the local noblemen to Mdina, which was the old capital city. And so there were these huge festivities, and we are about to welcome the new ruler of the island. And they gave him the keys to Mdina and the pasta machine, just to remind the Frenchman who was Lil Adam that we're very, very Sicilian when it comes to our food. Because pasta, well, it's Mediterranean. You'll find it in Tunisia, you'll find it in Libya, you'll find it in Sicily, not in North Italy during the very early 16th century. And so it was all these little details that indicate of a peculiar bunch of people living on this rock, which today I call home.
No, it is amazing. So you see this mix of cultures and places that it really is fascinating. Make this island, these islands, I should say, this archipelago of islands, so fascinating and so much to see. And you walk around the streets of Valletta, you walk around the streets here, and it's an amazing place. It was a city of arts and culture, I believe, at one time. Yes, it's UNESCO, all kinds of things. So there's a lot of things. And I started this trip. I was up at some temples that date from 3500 BC, which is incredible. And back then, so people were using the sea to get here and going all over the place. And so now your museum is going to sort of reflect a lot of that, right?
Yes, we need to tell that story. We need to tell a story of 6000 BC until yesterday. And that is what we hope to achieve. It's not going to be easy, and I'm not sure how we're going to manage to do it, but we're going to give it we're going to give it our best.
Absolutely. Well, listen, and where is there a website that we can go to see the progress and what's going on?
Yes, heritagemalta.org.
heritagemalta.org. You'll learn about the process. I believe you're going to have sort of a teaser exhibition later this year.
Yes, a teaser exhibition.
Next year, pretty much, you're going to have a reopening, hopefully, right?
Yes, it's a slow process, but very importantly, anybody who wants to come to the museum, we've got a very, very special arm of the museum, which is we recreate the foods that were eaten in Malta all throughout the ages. Wow. So you can come here and you eat what was eaten 3,000 years ago at the temples in Gozo. Okay. Or else you can be eating what the Grand Master of Malta was eating for his Christmas dinner in 1797, or what Napoleon was eating, or what the British soldiers were eating just before Operation Husky around 75 years ago. So we try to tell that story through taste, and we're calling it Taste History. And we actually get groups over to experience Malta in a different way through taste.
Well, I do hope I could come up and hear what the American admiral was eating before he stormed the shores of Tripoli.
Yes, that's as I said, we've got a lot of information about that.
Absolutely. Well, Liam, it's been fascinating to speak with you. I got to come back when you're getting done next year.
Yes, hopefully, it'll be a pleasure to have you over.
Well, and we can go do another interview then and see what you have here. It's going to be a fascinating museum. Going to be a great place for your clients to come, and also right now come over and have a little feast to begin with now.
Why not?
And then you can take the boats over here and from Valletta, and it's an amazing, amazing place. Again, Liam, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
A pleasure.
I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.